I just want to tell about a couple financial relationships before I start. I do a lot of medical talks, and that's important. First, I'm a full-time professor at the MIT Media Lab, where we work with over 75 companies, many of whom make wearable sensors. You know, companies like Microsoft, Samsung, NEC, GSK, Otsuka, a lot of pharma and medicine also. It's hard to read. Intel, LKK, Biogen, Medivine. And I also have co-founded two companies, Affective and Empatica. And Empatica is relevant to today's talk because they make the two sensors that I'm wearing and many of the things we've used in our research. Affectiva used to make the sensors, but no longer does hardware. So I own stock in those, and also Empatica is very close by, 10 minutes from here. It's hard to believe now, but it's been more than 15 years since I tried to figure out how, as an engineer, I could do more objective measurement of emotion. We wanted to understand what people were feeling, not just what they say they're feeling, but what was physiologically happening. And the picture on the left is Jennifer Healy, my first PhD student, who pioneered with me several ways to take technology that was used in medicine and biofeedback and try to see if we could understand with machine learning and pattern recognition what the emotions were that were happening. And you see her with galvanic skin response, which the more general phenomenon, electrodermal activity, sensors on the fingers, pressing Klein scintigraph, respiration sensor around the chest, electromyogram on the jaw. We realized quickly that the emotions we could measure in the lab they were interesting, but they weren't very strong. They weren't very robust. And to get real emotion, we needed to get out of the lab and into the real world. Bicycling, music, socializing, real world situations. And there's Keith Lockhart, the conductor of the Boston Pops, wearing sensors in his performance, which we had tried to hide in his jacket under his Armani suit. But he asked if we could put them on the outside where everybody could see, which was the opposite of what we thought he wanted. We also built a skin conductance sensor that could leave the lab and map to the brightness of an LED, and then a variety of wrist-worn sensors. And I'm going to talk more today about the kinds of things we've been learning about the brain and emotions with the wrist-worn sensors. Now, my goal originally with that, while it started with emotional intelligence, we quickly learned that there were a lot of people who needed help in this area. And I know many of you work with applications, and we became very interested in helping people with autism. This is a picture of a boy who's experiencing a lot of stress and may be unable to speak and explain his feelings to people. One person with autism typed to tell me that while we were trying to build technology to help them understand emotion, they needed to have some technology to help us understand their emotion. It was not just a problem for them to understand our emotion, but we were getting them wrong. In fact, they said, "Roz, you're misunderstanding me." And I'm like, I guess you're right. We need to improve our ability to understand each other. So with that, I started to try to understand what were the emotions that they really were having trouble with. And they talked about a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress. So we went back to our wearables that were designed to measure skin conductance and photoplethysmograph, blood volume, pulse, heart rate variability. And we started building lots of different versions. And we built ones that could work on the ankle as well as on the wrist, because many children had problems with things on their wrists. They were distracted by that, or some of them had injurious behaviors. They would bite their wrists, put it in their mouth. So the ankle was a better place for some. And we also did work on the palm to compare the palm to the wrist to other locations. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the sensors I'm wearing today, and then tell you more about the scientific findings in the rest of the talk. So the sensor, the newest sensor for researchers right now that we've been using, I'm wearing on the right, measures four things. It measures the motion, it measures temperature optically, right below the surface of the skin. Actually, it doesn't measure sleep per se, it measures motion, and motion plus temperature plus autonomic is used to derive sleep. And the autonomic indicators that it has are two. They are the electrodermal activity. So here's just a screenshot of what streams from this device to my iPod Touch or iPhone or Android device. The top is the electrodermal activity, here measured as skin conductance, and the bottom is the blood volume pulse, which you can see the dichrotic notch in the peaks here, and the peaks go with heartbeats and can give us the beat-to-beat intervals from which we can derive heart rate and, when you're still, heart rate variability. Now, our interest in these has been, this is a pointer, yeah, this is a pointer, has been to understand the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system actually has three parts: the sympathetic division, the parasympathetic division, and the enteric division, not shown here. The sympathetic is commonly known as fight or flight, but it actually is activated with lots of other conditions as well. The parasympathetic is known as rest and digest, but also, is active for more than that. And if we look at something like the heart rate can go up when you withdraw the vagus nerve response here, or if you kind of step on the brake here with the nerve, it can slow, and it can accelerate with the sympathetic response. So heart rate, in the beginning people said, you're trying to measure emotion, you should measure heart rate. Heart rate should go up if you're emotional. Well, that's true, but heart rate also goes up if Pietro stands up, and it goes up when you inhale, and it goes up when you sneeze, and it goes up with a lot of artifacts as well. So we learned pretty quickly that it wasn't the heart rate that was the most sensitive to emotion, but it was actually the heart rate variability was a much more useful measure. And traditionally, it's measured with electrocardiogram. So we did comparisons here with the BioPac electrocardiogram at 2,000 hertz and the wrist-worn previous version to the Sympatica sensor at 64 hertz with just the two-color light, red and green light, are used here to try to reduce motion artifacts. So we're comparing the wrist to electrocardiogram on the two wrists here. And we are having people hold still. So these are ideal conditions. There's a longer version of this on the web if you're interested in the details. This is just a summary slide where we look at false positives, false negatives, misdetections of peaks, and close to 10,000 peaks. And the overall error comparing the two devices was about 2%. And that's looking not just at beat-to-beat or peak-to-peak intervals and their standard deviation, but also the low and high frequency components that are used for estimating heart rate variability, sympathetic, parasympathetic, and sympathovagal balance relationships. So those a lot of people are very interested in for understanding stress, and now when you're very still, they can be obtained from a wrist-worn device with about 2% error. Most of our findings that I'm going to talk about today were before we had this, so I'm going to talk mostly about the sympathetic branch and things that we've learned from the skin conductance. Now, the first time I saw sympathetic nervous system data measured as skin conductance for 24 hours leaving the lab was these data right here. And this was an MIT student wearing it for 7 days, and this is 24 hours. And the amplitude is the skin conductance. It's small here, you can see it's different from day to day. On this day, the maximum amplitude is 3. On this day, the maximum amplitude is 21. So don't compare the peaks across days, but compare within a day. And we see that there's much more activation with the lab and calm during television, and surprisingly, a huge peak during sleep and low during relaxing. And consistently at MIT, very hard problem sets. It's high with studying, it's high with lab problems, cognitive load, emotional load can make it go up. And to the embarrassment of we MIT professors, the low point pretty much every day is classroom activity. I'm glad I got you to laugh, because yours is going down too when there's a speaker up here. But if you laugh, it goes back up. Another huge surprise to me was I expected sleep to look like classroom activity. And it does at the beginning, but then there's usually a huge peak. In fact, many days, it's the biggest peak of the day. It's huge. Here, the biggest peak of the day. And I thought something was wrong, or I thought this person was having nightmares. And so I borrowed a home REM detector to put the piezos on my eyes and see if when I was having rapid eye movement, I was having more skin conductance. And it turns out that the rapid eye movement is usually during the low points. And the peaks are usually during non-REM, usually during deep sleep. Stage 3, slow wave sleep, or the latter part of non-REM in an adult stage 2. So that's still kind of a mystery to us. I'll show some other interesting results we're getting related to that. But we still have a lot to understand about the brain and why it makes these peaks. So back to I'll come back to sleep later, but back to the child with autism. What you see here is the blue window is the skin conductance from her left and right ankle, streaming live right now. On the right here is what we see. And this is this blue window here in this 45 minutes of data. So here she's having a meltdown, and it's this peak right here. There's a little bit of a wireless dropout here where the line is straight. And that was an early version of the sensor that is being tested there. What you see in the bottom here is, so 5 minutes, another 5 minutes. There's about 10 minutes here where her levels are building, and then she has this meltdown. And then we can go and look at other data where she's decreasing, and we can ask what activities, what states are associated with her going up or with her relaxing again. And let's look over at the other biggest peak here. Here she is showing that there are multiple things in activities that can map to increasing skin conductance. Physical exertion, cognitive load for motor planning, and emotional load or emotional stress or excitement of getting on. It could be positive or negative here. We don't know. We think probably positive because in this case, when she swings, which she's done many times, she gets very activated getting on, but she's very calm afterwards. There's a beautiful decaying exponential. For her, swinging is like for audiences with PowerPoint. It just goes down. When we bring medicine and engineering together, we learn a lot about each other's descriptions, and we can start to bring objective data to diagnoses. Here we have 5 children who have the same medical diagnosis. They all are labeled with autism. Each child wore one sensor on the ankle every day at school. They go to school, they put on the sensor, they are in school all day. Before going home, they take off the sensor. And this was 60 days at school for each child. And what we see here is that this child and this child, let's look at this one. This is the number of days that they had this average skin conductance response, electrodermal activity. Just the average, very simple here. We do much more complicated things, but let's be very simple. This child, in 60 days, their average was never above 1. This child, in 60 days, their average was usually below 1, but 2 days are above 1. But most days are below a half. Most days are below a half. But as you can see, these 2 children, their average day is higher than these children ever were. So this child, on average, is higher than this child was over 60 days. And they have the same diagnosis. Okay? But they're very physiologically different. And as we try to learn about baselines and individual differences, we have to show and understand that people have very different physiological set points. And the wearable sensors now can start to help us understand a child who's very aroused most of the time versus a child who's under-aroused most of the time. And you might want to give them very different kinds of treatments based on that starting point. in particular, I saw some people here are working on ADHD, the attention deficit disorder, and that tends to be associated with very low arousal. So somebody with ADHD may want to do activities that increase their arousal, and that may help them focus more. Whereas somebody who has really high arousal may need activities to calm them down in order to focus. Also, we see some people who go back and forth between high arousal and low arousal, and we need to understand, that as well. Now, we were very interested in helping people who were non-speaking to be better understood. And this was, this next, what looks like a little detour in our motion work, turns out to be very interesting and come back and tell us more about the brain. But I was quite unprepared for what I was about to learn here. One of the students in my lab asked me, Professor Picard, could I borrow a sensor over Christmas? My little brother cannot talk. He has autism, and I want to see what's stressing him out. And I said, sure, take a sensor. In fact, take 2 sensors, and take a soldering iron, too, because they broke a lot back in those days. He said, I don't need the soldering iron, MIT student, but he took the 2 sensors. So he put the 2 sensors on his little brother at the same time, which I would not have recommended. I would have said, do one, and then when it breaks, do the other. But I'm really glad he did, because what happened really surprised me. I was back in my office looking at the boy's data on my screen, and this day looked normal, and this day looked normal, the 2 wrists. The next day looked normal stress profile for a boy with autism, or actually even a healthy child with no diagnosis. And the next day, I expected to look normal, but my jaw dropped. One of the wrists data was so high that I thought it must be broken. You can't get stress that high. We know at MIT, we stress people out. We do loud noises in their ears, we do qualifying exams, we intimidate them in awful ways. They get very stressed, but not that high. And it was on only one side. How can you be stressed on one side and not the other? And the other side had almost no response. But right before that moment and after that moment, there were very clear signatures on both sides related to sleep. And I thought, okay, it looks like it's working before and after, so how could it break just here? And is it broken on the left side or the right side? They both didn't make sense. So I tried to do some things in the lab to get the signal to go so high, and it didn't work. So finally I gave up, and I called the student at home. Never done this before, professor, calling on his vacation. Hi, sorry to interrupt your vacation. How's your little brother? Hey, any idea what happened to him? And I gave the exact date and the time. And he says, I don't know, I'll check the diary. Diary? MIT student keeps a diary? Like, I'm so quick prayer, like, what are the odds he wrote this down? He comes back and he says the exact date and time. And he says, that's right before he had a grand mal seizure. Now, I don't know about you, I didn't really know what seizures were. I'd heard of them. So I started doing a little research, and I thought, I don't know if this could actually be that or not. And I called a doctor in Boston, Dr. Madsen, who's a dad of a student. Hi, Dr. Madsen. This is Rosalind Picard. I know your daughter. She's a student at MIT. Hey, any idea if it's possible that there could be a huge sympathetic nervous system surge? And in this case, we thought it was 20 minutes before the seizure. And he said, probably not, no. But he said, you're making me think of this time when we had a patient who, before having a seizure, had the hair stand on end on one arm. One arm's hairs all went up. I said, on one arm? And he said, yeah, just on one side. And then I told him, well, this happened on only one side, and I couldn't understand it. And he said, actually, that I can explain. So I'm going to explain it to you, what we think might have happened. But first, let me just show you. He got interested. We made a lot more sensors. We got safety approval, and we enrolled over 90 patients in the hospital in a study to gather the electrodermal activity data and the motion and electroencephalograph, EEG, and the electrocardiogram data. And we found that we could build a seizure detector that, well, first of all, we found that 100% of generalized tonic-clonic seizures, there are 3 of them here, have this very large skin conductance response. Not up over 80 here, but definitely high. This is this boy's sleep data. This is 24 hours. So usually the sleep would be the biggest peak of the day, and here the seizures are much bigger. This is accelerometer data showing the movement is also large. These are seizures where you have convulsions. Not all seizures have convulsions. We do get a significant response for the majority of the kind of seizures, the partial seizures that make you unconscious and do not have convulsions. Most seizures are, the biggest danger is like hitting your head or drowning. But it turns out that actually the #1 cause of death after seizures is not hitting your head or drowning. It's having something else happen afterwards. And that's called SUDEP. And it's actually in the years of potential life lost, because this strikes younger people, SUDEP, sudden unexpected death in epilepsy, is #2 after stroke, ahead of amyotrophic sclerosis, Lou Gehrig's disease, multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, meningitis, encephalitis, and taking more lives every year. Now, a seizure, and I'm going to come back and relate this to emotion and the other regions of the brain. A seizure is like a little burst of electrical activity in the brain that can spread all over. And it may stay localized or it may spread. And it's likened to like a little electrical fire. In the United States, you cannot build a house without having a smoke detector. I think in the future, you will not send people out with epilepsy without a detector that can alert to their seizure. Because we've learned that the alert and bringing somebody to check on somebody potentially could prevent a lot of the deaths, which are believed to be associated with a cessation of respiration, which may be possible to restart simply by somebody being there. Now, one of the things that taught me a lot about the brain in this work was this set of findings. This is a little blurry here, but each channel is a channel of, from an electrode on the scalp from the EEG. And what was shown is that these are sort of going crazy during a seizure, then the seizure ends, and this should look like normal brain activity, but instead it looks flat. So here the brain has kind of overreacted by shutting down the cortical activity near the scalp electrodes. This is called post-ictal, post-seizure, generalized across the channels, EEG suppression, all below 10 microvolts. And this is always found in the cases of monitored SUDEPs, which is a small number right now, 16. But that's when something is found in 100% of the medical condition that's life-threatening, you pay attention to it. To our surprise, we were looking at the skin conductance responses and trying to figure out why they were so big. And we thought, well, was the person jerking so much that they were getting sweaty? No, it's not related to the movement. You can have a lot of movement or no movement, and you can have a big skin conductance or a little one. It's not correlated with movement. But it turns out that the electrodermal response amplitude is correlated with how long the cortex is shutting down. Now, if you're like me, you go, huh? Like, isn't that saying the brain is shutting down? And isn't electrodermal activity picked up by the brain? So, like, how can shutting off the brain make this signal bigger? Well, it turns out this is not shutting off the whole brain. This is just a signal suppressing the electrical activity near the scalp. Remember, the EEG measures surface potential. It does not measure deep brain activity. The skin conductance, we've been learning, is more likely to be elicited by the deep brain activity. By the way, all of the things I'm showing you are published, and I'll give a URL at the end where you can get all of our papers. So here's a key set of findings that have motivated a lot of the work that is coming next. Mangina and Boucheron and Mangina went inside the brains of people who had seizures where they could put depth electrodes in. And they stimulated these main emotion centers here, the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the cingulate. And when they stimulated on the left amygdala, you get a big left skin conductance response. and very little right skin conductance response. And when you stimulate the right amygdala, you get a big right skin conductance response and very little left skin conductance response. And this pattern holds also for the hippocampus, anterior and posterior, right and left, and the cingulate. These are core regions in the brain involved in memory, emotion, attention, pain, anxiety, fear, stress. And what they're showing us is that the skin conductance can actually have a pattern associated with which side is activated. Now, many seizures hit these regions of the brain, and if a seizure were to hit the right temporal lobe and the right amygdala, you would expect it to have a big right response and essentially no left response. So this kind of mapping between the deep brain regions and the skin could help explain why this boy had a big response on one side and nothing on the other, or very small.
Embrace is designed to be a gorgeous watch and a medical quality device. It's made of leather and metal, it's very easy to wear, and it has a ring that illuminates time, both hours and minutes. In today's world of non-stop action, it's tough to achieve the right balance. Embrace makes it very easy to monitor physiological stress, arousal, sleep, and physical activity. You can see how you're doing at work, while running, during dinner or sleep. You can set Embrace to give private vibration alerts. You can learn how to reduce stress and feel better. You can also send an alert to a friend or a loved one. You can learn about yourself in a way that is easy to understand. But Embrace does even more.
Our device is designed to detect unexpected seizures. Embrace is designed to save lives for a lot of people with epilepsy. Seizures can seriously hurt or even kill people, and we need an alert to intervene. 1 in 26 people in the US will develop epilepsy at some point during their lifetime. Everybody with epilepsy should be able to have a device that alerts a friend or a family member to come help at the time that they might need it.
This device will measure both movement and physiological signals. The combination is likely to be very important for detecting potentially life-threatening seizures.
So you can see why we had to take a little detour, because we have the chance to help a lot of people who struggle with epilepsy to get better care and hopefully have better outcomes. So we have been working on lots of different sensors here, wind up testing them in the epilepsy monitoring unit, still very interested in these other use cases. Many people started asking us for a lower price version. At Affective, we'd sold a skin conductance sensor that was $2,000 list price with a lot of nice software, but people need something much lower cost. And so we've been working very, very hard to come up with something that could do that, and that's now being released later this year, and it will be under $200, which is very exciting, and you are encouraged to pre-order one if this interests you, if you know somebody with epilepsy. Or the other thing we're doing is giving alerts for skin conductance. I'm proud to say we did an Indiegogo campaign with this, and it was completely funded and overfunded, which was wonderful. And we were, the first time I know a company was able to do this with a new technology, able to donate to children who can't afford them one sensor for each one other people bought who could afford one. So if that interests you also, there are a lot more people who need them, and we're still continuing to look for ways to support the people who can't afford them. Yes?
Do you only wear one side, or do you need two sensors?
Good question. For most seizures, generalize. And once they generalize in the brain, the signal shows up on both sides. So in most of our data, it shows up on both sides, so one sensor is enough. In the beginning, when you're doing a research study and you're looking for unusual things, I recommend both sides to make sure that you're getting it. I'm going to show you some other reasons why the two sides are interesting now with our findings. So I'll just mention, this is, we're going through FDA approval right now, so I can't claim it's a seizure detector unless I wear my MIT hat where we publish seizure detection work. But I can show that we're detecting vital events. And one of the other things we're doing that I'm excited about personally is just giving a vibration when the skin conductance goes up. A lot of people are not aware of their skin conductance increasing or their autonomic stress increasing until it's so bad that they're like ready to yell at you. And they would like to have an early warning indicator that it's going up. So you can set this to vibrate and give personal feedback as your level climbs. So the first version coming out will not only do seizure alerts, it will do these autonomic stress alerts, which again, many people with autism and many computer scientists and engineers also have been asking for. Oh, and it also will tell the time just with the 2 LEDs giving the minutes and hours here. I'll show my minutes and hours time here. Also, back to wanting to communicate for a non-speaking person, if he was wearing this, he could communicate to the caregiver that his levels are going up, even before he gets too stressed and has a meltdown. Also, many husbands and wives, husbands have mostly asked, could I have a mood ring that tells me my wife's mood before I go home? Now, it's not the same as the mood, right? But it does have temperature, skin conductance, motion, and you can see if your loved one has had an unusually high day or unusually low day, or if it just went up during traffic, and you can decide how to interpret that. It can vibrate too, so Pietro could have his vibrate when my level goes up. It'd be going up a lot right now. Here's just an example of what people can do with that data when they share it. This was made with a Q sensor a long time ago. It was not live, did not have the live alert vibration capability, but was one of the reasons why we want to do that. Here, again, is the height of the skin conductance over, in this case, about 2 hours. This is a young adult who's got autism, and she's giving a 3-minute talk. She's worried about her talk, so she asked if she could borrow a sensor, and I said, sure, take one. And here she learns that the event will be delayed, which causes her stress to go up. She starts pacing, this walking back and forth, like this, which, as you can see, is associated with her levels going down. Then her friend tells her, boyfriend sitting there says, stop pacing, that doesn't help you. So she can't show him the data then, right? So she just stops pacing, and she starts stimming. I asked her later, what is stimming? What do you mean you were stimming? And she said, I was kind of doing this flapping, rocking thing. Okay. Then the event starts. She gives her talk. That would be her biggest peak, except there's some audio feedback that was sensory overload. But mostly she's relaxing after the talk. After this, she sits down with the computer and the sensor and her friend, and she wants to show him the data. And the two of them look at the data, they look at the timestamps, and the first words spoken were from him. And he said to her, I'm not going to tell you to stop pacing anymore. The next morning I saw them before another event. This time she's pacing, and this time he's just typing and ignoring her and letting her pace. So what we see is that there is the possibility for some real behavior change when people believe that they really understand what might be going on here. Now, this does not mean that pacing calms everybody. It does not mean that stimming activates everybody. Stimming can be calming for some people. If you force me to pace when I don't want to, that may not be calming, right? But overall, if you have trouble communicating the feelings and whether they're increasing or decreasing your autonomic stress, these kinds of tools can help you get better objective information that, when shared with people, can lead to better behavioral communication changes. Now, I want to quickly say something about the peaks of arousal during sleep. Why are they so big during sleep? We still don't really know. I want to do more studies. If anybody here wants to do sleep studies with us, let us know. One question, we looked at a lot of things. I don't have time to go into all of them here. But one of them is showed a very significant finding that I'd like to try to replicate in a bigger group. And this is related to memory formation. And there's a reason this might actually be true, and that is because of the hippocampal involvement in memory formation and the hippocampal involvement in skin conductance. what we tested was the accuracy of recognizing which group of people was measured here. So we took a large group of people. They were given, 24 adults, 72 nights of sleep. They were given a visual discrimination task that is a task of learning and memory consolidation. This is work of Bob Stickgold. He's an expert on that. And then we measured if they were one of the best learners or one of the worst learners. Top 20% learning improvement, bottom 20% no improvement or got worse. And we tested what were the best predictors of that. Was it the EEG and a bunch of features from EEG channels? Was it the sleep stage, polysomnography, having more REM early in the night, more slow wave early in the night, or REM later in the night? Was it accelerometer movement during sleep? Was it skin conductance? And after we applied 6 different machine learning models to all of these possibilities, we saw that the red, and in one case the purple, was always the best performer. And the red turns out to be the electrodermal activity, which again we would expect to be elicited by hippocampus and amygdala, which we would expect to be involved in memory. Doesn't prove that they were, but it's intriguing enough that we'd love to do some more data collection in this space. Now, we sometimes see left-right differences during sleep. We see them during wake, and we wanted to try to understand these more. At first, I thought they were just motion artifacts, and now we know that they can be driven by different regions of the brain. In particular, for strong right-handers, in brain imaging studies, the right amygdala is usually more activated with threat and with strong negative stimuli like grief or sadness, although not with things like anger, interestingly. So it's not just simply negative. And the left is not just positive, but is a mixture of positive and negative in the brain imaging studies. There are a lot of other studies that converge on this. The ones that caught my eye were where they could do the depth measurements as well, like the Mangina-Bourgeois Mangina, where they also noticed children who had learning disabilities were often asymmetric with their electrodermal activity. And that could be, one possible explanation, child goes in to be evaluated by scientists. Child is feeling very threatened. People have told me when they go in for these studies, I know that I've got a disability. I know I'm going to do bad. I know they're going to give me a test that I fail at, and so they're feeling threatened. They're feeling anxious. They are set up for failure. So that's a situation where I would be asymmetric, even just as a healthy adult. It's very interesting to me that in the brain studies, they've shown these significant associations between anxiety and depression and right amygdala volume. Those who know famous people with autism like Temple Grandin, she has a very large right amygdala. She said it was 3 times larger than normal. And the generalized anxiety disorder, also greater right amygdala. So this has not been proven yet, but I would now make these predictions that given those findings, we can predict, and I've just published this under work called multiple arousal theory, that when you expect the right amygdala to be much bigger than the left, we would also expect the right skin conductance to be much bigger than the left. So we might predict that we would see that responsivity be asymmetric under stressful conditions. We have gone looking for this now in some data we had already gathered, and while we didn't gather anxiety level here, we did see, this is the classic task where people count backwards by 7s, which is kind of stressful, especially when an experimenter is sitting behind you hitting an obnoxious buzzer if you get it wrong. MIT people, of course we can subtract. You're very embarrassed if you mess up, right? So we make them kind of stressed doing this. And here we looked at the left and the right skin conductance. Each one of these is one person. So person number 17, their right skin conductance is a little bit above their left. But person number 24 here, their right skin conductance is huge, and their left is almost like it's not working. And we double-checked the sensors were working. We swapped the left and right sensors. We replicated this, and we keep finding a large number of people have huge asymmetry during this task, while a lot of people are fairly symmetric. Now, an important thing to note, if you've ever used this physiological measure and read the literature, the standard is you put one sensor on the non-dominant hand. If you did that here, you would only have the blue data, because, well, actually one of these people was a left-hander, but everybody else is a right-hander. So you'd only have the blue data. And you would miss that these people had a lot of stress. You would make the wrong conclusion. So I now am hypothesizing that in a lot of the literature where they only measure the non-dominant hand, they may not have the full story. They may have only a piece of it. And that could also explain a number of the mixed findings out there. Because when people are under a real threatening situation, I've now seen this many times, sometimes their right one goes through the roof and their left one goes flat. And if they're only measuring on the left, they're like, gee, it's not working. My skin conductance isn't up, and I'm stressed. Like, put it on the right, too. Oh, my goodness, the right one's really high, and the left one's not. Who would have expected it, right? But we sort of accidentally found this when we started working with people who were having seizures and abnormal neurological events where it was showing up on one side and not the other. All right, so now we're not so surprised by that. I should also say it's not so simple as, it's not just right is negative and left is positive, and right, it's not the whole right brain and the whole right side. Some regions of the brain, when stimulated, activate both sides equally. So frontal cortex, mid-T2, you get symmetric responses. Motor, you get contralateral responses. So it's not as simple as always one side, one side. Okay? There are some parts of the brain that map contralaterally, some parts that map bilaterally, and some parts that map ipsilaterally. If you're interested in this, I've just published a paper with Simon Feder and Yadid Eisenberg called Multiple Arousal Theory, Daily Life, Lecture Lack Assembly. All of our papers are online here. If we can't put the final copyright version, we put the last version before editing up there, and you can get that as well. Now, where are we going? We are now taking not just the wearable data, but we're also combining it with smartphone data, with lab measurements of things like melatonin, circadian cycles, environment measures, social interaction, experience sampling, self-report data, and we're measuring people long-term. We've got NIH funding right now to do 400 people. We're about halfway through that. And we are trying to forecast if people's behaviors, autonomic profiles, sleep profiles, social profiles are associated with sickness or health, good mood or bad mood, high stress or low stress, and can we help them learn behaviors that lead to better health. Our long-term goal now is to develop measures that can, this is not based on real data here, this is a conceptual graph, but we'd like to find the actual measures that can show if somebody's doing well or not well. Over time, you know, like you get admitted to school, you get hired for a job, you're doing well, you may do better, you may do worse. Hopefully after you do badly, you recover and you get back to doing better. But some people don't recover, they're vulnerable, and they fall down and get very depressed or very sick. We would like to understand back here if you're on the red curve or the blue curve. Are there early indicators that you could measure and change that could show a person how to move from the red line to the blue line here and be healthier? We're doing a lot of work now in mental health and depression. In physical health, there are a lot of physical biomarkers, you know, things like cholesterol and measuring proteins and gene expression. In mental health, there's really nothing here. Everything is largely still based on observation, interview, asking people to fill out surveys. While that is still useful, we think that the new tools of affective wearables and smartphones and things that we carry with us can help give much richer data that could start to fill in these boxes and help us understand more about what's happening before people become depressed, before they get a diagnosis. And maybe then we could prevent many of these kinds of health problems from progressing. All right, I'm just going to summarize here. One of the things that surprised me when we saw the post-ictal EEG suppression, you know, brain activation was related to skin conductance, or skin conductance is, you know, different on the right than the left. You know, and I had originally just thought it was general arousal. You know, how can you get more information from this? So I was saying to a doctor I'm really surprised that these brain regions map to the skin. And she goes, oh, I'm not surprised. She goes, it's really easy, Roz. It's Medicine 101. Medicine 101. I'm an engineer. I never had Medicine 101. She said, in Medicine 101, we all learned that when we were embryos, we had 3 kinds of tissue, the ectoderm, the endoderm, and the mesoderm. Mesoderm formed the muscle and bone. Endoderm formed digestion, respiration. The ectoderm, from the beginning, connected our brain and neural tissue with our skin. So it was no surprise to her that deep regions of the brain that the EEG can even miss. Okay? The EEG is going flat, while the hippocampus and amygdala may be very activated, and the skin is responding. Deep regions in the brain can map to the skin in different places in ways that may tell us what's going on deep in the brain, even though an EEG may miss what's happening. The EEG may be getting signals that are suppressed. So I think this is just the beginning, and we actually have a whole lot more to learn about what the outside of the body can tell us about what's going on deep in the brain. And with that, I will stop and put up, again, the URL where you can help yourself to publications. If you're interested in sensors, Hepaticus 10 minutes from here. And I'd be happy to take some questions. Thank you.